Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Think Big, Healthy Soil, Healthy Planet. Think Big is a local nonprofit focused on improving our island's resilience, equity, and sustainability through education, advocacy, and policy development. We have some wonderful speakers for you today, but I first wanted to start by introducing our moderator, Jeannette Gurung, who is someone that I am so pleased to call a friend and a colleague. It's an honor to know you, Jeannette. In addition to being a member of Think Big, Jeannette is the Executive Director of Women Organizing for Change in Agriculture and Natural Resource Management, or WOCAN. WOCAN is a global network with over 1,400 members in 114 countries. They support capacity building for women's leadership and empowerment. Jeannette is also the creator of the W+ standard, which measures the impacts of projects and supply chains on women's empowerment while reducing the effects of climate change. Jeannette also serves on Hawaii Ag Hui, the Climate Impact X International Advisory Council, the Sustainable Development Advisory Group of Viera, the Coalition for Women's Economic Empowerment of the International Center for Research on Women, and the Gender and Climate Investment Working Group of the Gender Smart Investing Summit. She's a very busy woman. From her home in Hawaii, Jeannette is currently working on developing a climate resilient and agricultural innovation hub for women farmers in Hawaii County to pilot innovations and practices to achieve climate and economic resilience through support to women farmers and entrepreneurs. Welcome, Jeannette, and thank you for moderating today.
Thank you so much, Heather. And it's my honor as well to serve with you as a friend and a colleague within Think Big. So welcome to everybody and good morning on this rainy morning. We're here to talk about soil health, which is something very close to my heart and I hope to all of yours as well. Clearly, soil health and sustainability are vital for agriculture in the state as well as this island. But we should remember that soil health affects not only crop and livestock production, but it also affects forest, water ecosystems, and I want to say even ocean life, because the corals are, of course, affected by erosion of the soils up Mauka. And I would like to also draw your attention, this is the middle of the legislative session for the state. There is a healthy soil bill. There's two versions of it, actually. The one, HB 443, that I'm thinking of. It requires the Department of Agriculture to establish a healthy soils program and a grants program that would provide a system of awards, financial incentives, and educational and technical assistance to small farmers, ranchers, and landowners to implement selected farm management practices that will improve soil health and build carbon stocks. So it's perfect timing for us to talk about this topic in relation to this upcoming bill that we hope gets passed. I think it came very close to being passed at the last session, so we're hopeful this time. So for this webinar, we've assembled a group of experts who can teach us about soil health. What are these best practices that perhaps this bill will be able to incentivize and support? What does soil health mean? Why is it so important? How can it be improved through measurement and practices within agriculture and also with forest lands on this island of Hawaii? I'm extremely honored and pleased to say that our first speaker is Susan Crow, who I think for me is maybe the guru or the guruini, the feminine form of the guru, I'm not sure. Susan is the professor of soil ecology and biogeochemistry at the Natural Resources and Environmental Management Department at the University of Hawaii in Mānoa. She's the leader of the university's soil health research team, she has extensive experience studying carbon dynamics and soil health in natural and managed ecosystems both. She's also a member of the Hawaii delegation to the Natural and Working Lands Initiative of the U.S. Climate Alliance that also assists policymakers. So welcome, Susan. I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here with all you folks interested enough in soil health to join today. And a rainy day, it's a good time for a nice webinar. So thank you so much, Jeannette, and for Think Big for the invitation. And the honor of kicking this webinar off. Noel, if you don't mind sharing those slides. So yeah, I had a little bit of an introduction already. Thank you so much. I'm part of the Mānoa Soil Health Research Hui. It's a very large team. I'm particularly honored to work with Jonathan Dienick and Ty Maas, Dr. Johanny Rivera-Zayas, and a whole crew of people, including technicians, field techs, lab techs, and a million students and interns over the years who have come together and developed out this concept of soil health with us. And so it's been a journey, and I'll share a little bit of it today. But given the recent focus on climate smart agriculture, what we've really started to build out is this idea that soil health is a foundation for climate smart agriculture. And that's what I'll talk about today. Next slide, please. So what is soil health is kind of our first question. Healthy soils nourish plants, protect the environment, and sustain communities. Soil health is the capacity to provide essential functions, impart vitality, and be resilient to disturbance, resilient to climate change, and resilient to our past choices and how we've cared for the land. Next slide, please. Our group over the years has worked hard to be sure that when we say we measure soil health, that those indicators that we've chosen to measure are right for Hawaii. And so in 2019, Hannah Eubanks finished her master's thesis, which focused on a survey of Hawaii's soils and ecosystems, such that we could measure 46 different parameters that may comprise soil health. And we narrowed those parameters down into our proposed indicators, which thankfully finally made it through that key metric of success for academics like myself, a publication, right? In 2023, we had back-to-back papers. We're thrilled. So finally it's out there and kind of official, quote unquote, as we need to be, that these proposed indicators are a list of 11 instead of 46. We're getting better. And then a follow-up paper by my colleague Ty Maas took it one step further and actually took those 11 indicators and integrated those metrics into one soil health index, and actually totally cool, not just one index, but splits it out into multiple functional scores, which I'll talk about in the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. So we've been talking about soil health for a few years now, and often it's categorized as soil properties that fall under biological, chemical, physical categories. And so those original proposed soil health indicators fell out into biological, chemical, and physical. And this is the list of indicators from that paper. And then soil organic carbon is up at the top because soil organic matter is central to all aspects of soil health. It affects biology, chemistry, and physics. And so we put it at the top always. Next slide, please. So those properties, though, don't necessarily speak directly to those essential functions. Next slide. And healthy soils need to not just cover biological, chemical, and physical properties, but they need to be in that functional category, so that we understand what those properties actually do to help sustain life in the soil and bring vitality and bring resilience. And so if you take those biological, chemical, and physical and you rearrange them, as Dr. Maas did in her paper, then we start looking at three different factors, and you can see from the color rearranged there, each of these functional factors that we identified still have those same indicators, and now biology, chemistry, and physics are all spread throughout the factors. I know a lot of people have a lot of interest in microbes and microbial communities, and so you should be interested to see that factor 1 is really accessible microbial substrate. These are the factors that are indicators of available, right? Not just that it's there and present, but that microbes can actually access this substrate for food. The second factor fall under those master state variables, the biggies, pH, water stable aggregates, mega aggregates, and there's organic carbon. And then the third is back to microbes, the enzymes. Bulk density didn't quite make the cut in the index, but it's really important. So we still measure it. And I counted as 10 soil health indicators. Next slide, please. So we now think about these factors as functional factors. Next slide. And you can see then the distinct connection to soil function here on the right. 24-hour CO2 burst is one of our indicators. That's microbial respiration of accessible organic carbon substrate. Potentially mineralizable nitrogen, that's how much nitrogen is there, so that microbes can access it and mineralize it into something that plants need. And you can see down through the list, each of those indicators is linked to a specific soil function. So what is the connection to climate smart? If you could go to the next slide, please. Remember, carbon comprises about half of soil organic matter, and soil organic matter is central to all aspects of soil health. And so now the red circles have popped up, and you can see now carbon, nutrients, organic matter, carbon, organic matter. Almost all of these indicators has organic matter and carbon and nutrients at its core, and that's the direct connection to climate smart agriculture. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we talk about climate smart, what is agriculture? I increasingly see agriculture as the art and science of cultivating the soil, growing crops, and raising livestock. This definition is also very clear that this includes forest products too, wood for construction and paper products. So we really remember that agriculture is inclusive of all landscapes here in Hawaii, pretty much because people are needing to interact with that landscape and help cultivate and manage, if I may use that word, right, in order to protect biodiversity, even in our pristine systems. And then agriculture is inclusive of all of those things. Next slide, please. Okay, climate smart. The technical definition of climate smart is listed here, handed down by the USDA: increased productivity, enhanced resilience, and reduced emissions. And so one of the things that I'm looking forward to doing in the next phase of our big project with our group is actually taking this technical definition and making it inclusive of our Hawaii systems. But you can see soil health is across all of these. Sustainable intensification of agriculture, adapting to climate change. So soil health is at the base of that resilience to disturbance, to climate change. And then also with carbon drawdown and other carbon offsets associated with local production, rather than having to import food, import fertilizer, we can reduce emissions as well. So soil health is across all three of these areas, which is why it's a foundation of climate smart agriculture. In the bottom, there's a little note there. It says it's worth noting that what is climate smart agriculture? Conservation tillage is included, cover cropping, nutrient management. I think our other people will talk about some of these. These are familiar practices, right? This makes sense. Next slide, please. And so if you look at different agricultural systems that you might be familiar with, sustainable, regenerative, conservation, there's climate smart right on the list, shares lots of different principles and practices, and soil health is something that's common across all of them. Again, why we're emphasizing soil health. Next slide, please. Okay, so key factors that underlie soil health here in Hawaii, which has come out of our research group, is that it is dependent on soil type. So these colors that you see on the slide, everybody's familiar with the different colors, the range of colors. That means different minerals underlying the soil type. We've got our mixed minerals, we've got our high activity clays, low activity clays, bright red, and poorly and non-crystalline minerals in our amazing volcanic ash derived soils. We have that, and we have past land use history. Whether or not there was intensive agricultural practice on that landscape fundamentally alters the soil health trajectory. And so these are the two factors that we actually take into consideration when computing the soil health index. In the next slide. So when you actually correct for or normalized to those differences due to mineralogy and past land use, then we can use one index to assess the soil health impacts of our current management system, which is what you see on this screen. Photos along the bottom show you what you are all already familiar with, right? The diversity of landscapes across our islands. And you can see some patterns that you might expect, that you might hypothesize. Conventional cropland has a lower soil health index on average than organic cropland on the left side of the slides. But then some other patterns that might not have been hypothesized pop out as well. So our pasture systems under sustainable management have the highest, significantly highest soil health index. And some of our tree-based systems, not all, but some, you can see a very wide range of soil health in the tree-based systems is lower than the pasture. And our unmanaged, previously intensive agricultural lands, these are the lands that are no longer actively cultivated and quite often have invasive species and are sort of targeted for sometimes for development, but what we're trying to do, right, is get them back into production. We want to target them for getting them back under some type of agriculture, food production, forest products, anything, right? They actually hold soil health because they have ecosystems that have come back. And next slide, please. So that really highlights these two concepts of we need to protect soil carbon and soil health where it is and support those practitioners and producers to continue those strong practices and to expand them. And then in other areas, this is evidence that we can, even in the harshest past land use conditions, there's improvement that is possible. And if we choose to manage those systems even better, more sustainably, then we can see measurable improvements in things like soil health. And so imagine if we chose to accelerate that improvement and maximize carbon drawdown in those systems based on how we interact with the land. There's an enormous amount of potential there. Next slide, please. And so just bringing it full circle back to this idea that there are so many different reasons, right, to protect the soil, whether under forestry, intensive agroforestry, silvopasture, pasture, intensive cropping, or whether it's organic or just improved conventional agriculture. There's room for improvement across the whole spectrum in the landscape, and these mixed use landscapes are really what's key to protecting not just the soil, but also our near shore environment, as Jeannette pointed out. So I think that's kind of where we're at. Mahalo. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm not sure if we're doing questions now or at the end. I think maybe at the end, but thanks again to my hui. It's a group effort, and yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Susan. That was so enlightening. And I think moving from the kind of academic perspective of the research to looking at the real practices and policy-related recommendations is extremely valuable. We will take questions if there are any clarifying questions for Susan. Otherwise, we would say hold on to your questions or put them in the chat or hold on to it. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentations. But does anyone have any? Let's see, can you raise your hand? Yeah, under reactions, or speak out if you have any questions immediately for Susan about the presentation.
I do have one quick question. Yeah, Susan, great presentation, really good information. The framework in Maz et al. For assessing soil health, was that applied to all agricultural lands, regardless of intended use, or is there a different set of factors applied for each intended use?
So it is one index applied to all of them. So we're really still in the process of figuring out how to weight each of those factors and what influence minerals and past land use have. And so moving forward, as we get more and more and more data into our database, that index will be improved, and we'll be able to sort of start to see if some systems need to be weighted a little bit differently, but at this stage, we're applying the same weighting across all of them because we're still just trying to understand if we're headed in the right direction, if we have the right indicators, if we could reduce the number of indicators down without losing any information. So we're still sort of in that research and development phase. But that index was developed with, I think, about 680 samples in our database. So it's a substantial number of samples across the range and diversity.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, there was someone else, I think, who had a question. Okay. If not, I think impressing me, Susan, was this idea. Who knew that our pasture lands have relatively high soil carbon in relation to our organically managed cropland? Big surprise to me. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, as I said, think of your questions for Susan and hold on to those. Next up is Christian Giardina, who's the research ecologist from the Institute of Pacific Islands Forestry. He works with the USDA Forest Service. He's here on the Big Island. I first met Christian on his own forest lot, I think near Papaloa. He has studied soil biology, forest management, global change at the university level. He continues to study climate mitigation, restoration of ecosystem processes, and community-based stewardship. So, Christian, over to you, please.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. Thank you, Jeannette, for the invite. I'll start by saying that I'm in the difficult position of following Susan. She gives a very wonderful talk on a topic I know that is near and dear to many producers on the coast. I am giving this kind of talk, I think, for the first time in my life, which is a talk from the producer perspective and not from a researcher perspective. The image here is from a 17-acre parcel of land that a Hui of Partners purchased back in 2001. And we purchased it with the intention to do forestry. And for us who were involved in this Hui, we all were involved in doing forestry research. And so we were really intent in trying to learn how forestry works on the ground, so to speak. I was with the CTAR, the College of Tropical Ag and Human Resources, back in 2001 as a postdoc. I had spent my master's and Ph.D. studying soils and soil biogeochemistry, and so I was very keen on seeing how to apply some of this knowledge to forestry. One of the partners lived on the mainland. He wrote a book on forest soils. And then another partner who also lived on the mainland was an expert in production ecology. And so we had some solid skill sets for tackling soil health questions. We worked with the state to develop a stewardship plan and to secure stewardship funding. And a portion of that was to address in a unsupported way the forest health needs of the future forest. And so we worked with CTAR to analyze some of the soils for nutrients, for organic matter. The analyses came back with some recommendations for optimal growth. The testing at the time wasn't really geared towards trees, especially not timber trees. It was geared much more towards crops that are annuals, and then also some perennial fruit tree crops. And so we immediately learned that our attempts to take a diagnostic approach to understanding forest or soil health was going to be complicated by a lack of relevant data. The other thing that complicated our efforts to understand forest soil health was the enormous variation across 17 acres, way more variation than I think we expected. Next, our team was basically me on the right, 22 years ago, and my wife and my 3.5-year-old son. This is the forest plantation that we established in the early days. The site had been used for sugarcane agriculture. It had been used pretty intensely. The soils were fairly poor. One of the recommendations was to lime the soils with a ton of lime per acre, which wasn't a feasible thing for us to do. And it also was really geared towards agricultural crops, and the pH needs of a lot of the trees that we were working with was not really clearly aligned with that prescription. I want to share the punchline right away. What were we thinking? So, well, if you can go back. Yeah. So we went into this and very quickly realized that we didn't know much about the trees and how they would perform on site. There was very few, basically very little information, very few data for the trees that generate high value on the international market. We quickly learned that the prescriptions for managing soils weren't really very appropriate. And so we entered into this very much trial and error. This is the plantation 22 years later. It is relatively successful. To give you a little bit of background, we, in our stewardship plan, identified the need for 7,000 seedlings next, representing 15 species that were planted on 15 acres. We generated a lot of things. We generated some awesome memories. We generated a bunch of lessons learned. And these 7,000 seedlings have helped us tell a story about forestry in the North Hilo Hamakua area. I wanted to just point out a couple success stories for us. We planted Honduran mahogany next. We planted about 1,500 Honduran mahogany. Today, there are about 600 left. Of those 600, probably about 300 are going to be crop trees that will have some economic value. Our champions are about 80 feet tall with a diameter at breast height of about 25 inches. We're thinking in about 10 or 15 years, these trees will be ready for market. We also planted next 3 types of eucalypt, Eucalyptus deglupta or rainbow bark, Eucalyptus chloesiana, which is known as tallow. It's used for flooring, and then Eucalyptus chloesiana. Oh, I said that, microcories. Sorry, that's tallow, and chloesiana is known as gimpy messmate. And what we started with was about 3,000 seedlings. 22 years later, we have 1,500 left. About 700 are crop trees. The champions are about 140 feet tall. Diameter is about 40 inches for the best trees. Next, we could make a postcard of our best trees. We found that we quickly realized that probably about a third of our 17 acres was actually high quality soil that could sustain the kind of growth on the right for really nice looking eucalypt trees. You're talking 70, 80, sometimes 90 feet of clear bole. On the left, mahogany plantings. That one tree that's kind of off to the left, that's our champion. It's about 25 inches in diameter with almost a 35-foot bole. But this postcard portion of our property wouldn't really tell the whole story. Next. A lot of our property was actually sitting, or a lot of our plantings were sitting in soil that had a much lower fertility, and so required much more attention with regards to nutrition management. I'll just go through real quickly too that our conception of health was a little bit broader than just soil health. We realized that when you do forestry, you have to think about health in multiple terms. Acacia koa, we planted a large number, hundreds of acacia koa. And in this case, we interplanted them with mahogany, thinking that the acacia koa would be a valuable crop tree, but also provide nitrogen fixation capacity to the site and provide nutrient-rich foliage and root turnover materials to the soil to help enrich the soil, to help the mahogany grow. Initial growth for the acacia, the koa, was fantastic. It was keeping up with our eucalypt species. But between year 2 and year 10, we lost almost all of our koa to Fusarium oxysporum, which is the disease that takes out koa at low elevations across Hawaii. Next, we planted about 800 Kaya nyassica, which is also in the Meliaceae, like Honduran mahogany. But in this case, we found that Kaya nyassica was very sensitive to insects, and all the tops of our Kaya were destroyed by insect pests. So between pathogens and insect pests, we lost a large number, over 1,000 trees, so that basically they were no longer going to contribute to our bottom line of producing timber trees. Next, we planted several hundred pheasantwood, Sanacia mea. This is a really interesting soil health species because it is a very nutrient demanding species, surprisingly, because it's a legume, and we thought that it would do well on these soils. And we just couldn't keep up with the nutrition demands of this species. It required regular fertilization. And so we do have a handful of trees that are successful, but for the most part, these trees are spindly and never really grew into a canopy tree. And next, teak. We planted hundreds of teak, and teak was also, like pheasantwood, a nutritionally demanding species. We have 2 of 300 plants that we put in the ground, planted. Surviving, and again, we learned that the nutritional needs of trees really need to be considered up front, so that you can anticipate what kind of nutrition prescriptions you can put. And it's very variable both across the site and across species. I want to just really emphasize that while these plantings were not successes, this lack of success could be ameliorated, I guess, with disease-resistant koa, with insect-resistant kaya, with a stronger understanding of the variation in soil health across a property to appropriately match plant with location on your property. And for teak, probably some combination of appropriate matching of the tree to site and more intensive management as well, because it's a very slow growing tree. Next. I wanted to highlight that we did understand that we were going to be challenged in terms of soil health. And so we selected nitrogen fixing trees to interplant with all of our other trees. In this case, Acacia mangium was interplanted with one of our eucalypt species. We planted Nara, which is Pterocarpus indicus, with another eucalypt species. We planted monkey pod with our kaya. We planted koa with our mahogany. And for the most part, that effort to improve soil health wasn't really successful. Most of our monkey pods died. The site wasn't appropriate, probably nutritional issues, but also climate. The Nara wasn't suitable for the site. It turns out Nara needs to have more neutral pH soils and better fertility soils, as well as a warmer climate. The one successful nitrogen fixing species that we did interplant was Acacia mangium, but a year after we established a plantation, the Hawaii weed risk assessment came out, and Acacia mangium was one of the top species on the list. And so we spent a good a good number of hours cutting out about 600 of these mangium trees from our plantation. And it did provide some nutritional benefit, but it was just a highlight to us how important prescriptions are for forest health, to achieve soil health, and then how to structure that prescription within this larger framework of forest health. So next, interestingly, you heard a really excellent talk about indicators. It turned out that our best indicator of soil health was the presence of guinea grass. You can kind of see my wife hidden in this one patch, but we realized that guinea grass, especially green guinea grass, was about the best indicator that we could rely on for understanding where on our property we had areas of high soil fertility. And conversely, next, we could use bearded strawgrass and broom sedge as an indicator of low soil fertility. These are the little yellow things that you see in this field are some of the chlorotic tops of our mahogany trees. And we were fortunate in that these mahogany trees were only sensitive to soil health conditions. And so we had to trial and error our way through a fertilization regime that would support the growth of the trees, but not stimulate an enormous growth of competing weeds. And so it was basically tablespoon precision ag for our mahogany trees, which are our most valuable crop tree. And just want to highlight that, again, looking back 22 years, we were dabbling in forest health. We were using super informal indicators. We were only partially successful in addressing soil health issues. And we're still really curious, probably at the half rotation stage for some of these trees, how we can continue to improve soil health for the next generation of trees and to also improve growth in the second half of the rotation. So with that, next, Mahalo.
Okay, thank you so much, Christian. That's a completely different perspective, obviously, from Susan. So are there any technical questions out there? Anybody would like to clarify anything that Christian talked about? If not, I found it fascinating as a forester myself. I think it sounds like you're still exploring, still looking for that silver bullet, if there is one, from species that you can interplant that can do nitrogen fixation. I found it fascinating to find out that we have indicator species that give us a quick and easy way to look at a piece of land and say, that one's in good shape. That's not, I don't know what Susan would say about that through measurement, but absolutely fascinating. Okay, I'm going to move to India now so that we can kind of stay. And thank you so much, Christian. And I think there will be some questions in the discussion that will come back to you. So I'd like to now introduce India Clark, who's with the Farm and Community Engagement. She's the coordinator there at the Oahu Resource Conservation Development Council. She also works with the Women Farmers Network, which I find absolutely fascinating and thrilling that here in Hawaii we have such a thing. She's most of the time on Oahu, but she is also frequently over on this island. She engages with the university, with NOAA's Pacific Service Center, the Olohana Foundation, and other community stewardship groups, agriculture organizations on resource management, resilience planning, policy, training, and outreach efforts. My goodness, what doesn't she do? She is here to talk about their farmer-to-farmer learning around soil health. So we're really pleased to have you, India. Over to you.
Thank you, Jeannette. And I believe I met you through the Women Farmers Network. I was also honored to have Susan speak at one of our workshops that we held just for women owned and operated farms. And we also had other female leaders who have been really formative in this work to help farmers understand how to improve their soil health. Jennifer Moore is one of those. She's our USDA research soil scientist, and she really put together this in-field soil health assessment that we use. So it was really interesting to hear about your indicative field species that you're using, Christian. We also had Bianca Clune, who was at that time the founding director of the NRCS Soil Health Division. And so I'm going to speak kind of in between Susan and Christian. So really speaking about the work with farmers from a diversity of operations. So not a specific farm, but a lot of our work really is a big value I feel that we're giving is the lab results from Susan's lab. It's what we hear from a lot of our farmers is that with this information, they don't feel that they're stabbing in the dark, and they really want to know, they want to have these measures for themselves and also to show others. And so I did want to share that I'm personally dedicated to this work because I do see soil health as a foundation to farming. I have my own farm in Mokuleia. After working for NOAA around community resilience and food security, and working with farmers, I worked on my on a farm for 6 years, managing that. And I really see that soil health is something that, as farmers, we can kind of forget about. We're heads down. Farmers wear so many hats. You're just trying to really get your crop rotations, your sales, your business side. There's so much. And you can kind of overlook some of the issues that you might be managing that could be related to soil health, a lack of health or function of the soil. And so I see this and as really a way to kind of take a broader perspective and kind of rule out some of those issues, such as, a lack of poor nutrient cycling, poor root development, imbalances in the soil ecology that could be leading you to more disease and pest pressure and have you chasing your tail. So I think this is kind of, the heart of our conversations with farmer to farmer learning is really, how do we get to crop health, and what is that role of improving the health and function of the soil, the properties of our soil, physical, chemical, biological. How can that help us kind of get ahead on that? And so, a lot of the farmers that I work with, they have this goal. And so it's not that farmers they're not aware of this and they don't want to get to this. It's just that they're so busy that they need help getting into the details, into the weeds. They really need to think about, what practices to use, the timing, because, cover cropping could help them address some of their goals for increasing organic matter, suppressing weeds, addressing compaction, but it might also increase pest or disease pressure based on the way they time that crop. So I think, that's the level that we're trying to work at with this project. And this is a cooperative agreement between Oahu RC&D and NRCS. So we're working really closely. I mentioned Bianca was kind of leading the soil health division in NRCS. And a lot of this work is bringing soil health plans and technical service providers as well to be able to help farmers with those plans and to take the soil samples and send them over to Susan's lab. So I see this as, kind of a capacity building for all of us together. So this project's really based on farmer to farmer learning, but it takes all of us working together, specializing in what we can to support farmers so that we can work more systematically. And so next slide, please. Okay. This is just kind of an overview of the project. There's different components to it. So in addition to forming cohorts on each island, so we've just worked we're about a year into the project. It's a 2.5-year project. We've worked with farmers on Oahu, on Kauai, and we're currently working in Maui. So we're about to start our first in-person workshop and start the soil sampling, where we go out to each farmer's land and we understand some of their management challenges, what practices that they've tried. We gather all this information with the farmer to help them piece all of this together. And so when we do present out the lab results through one-on-one consultation, we have all this background, and we've worked with them for 2 months already. And so I have on here the milestone of 40 producers. With the Maui cohort, we're already a little over 30. There's such an interest in this that although we can only take 10 commercial farmers for each island that we're working with, we have farmers who are surveying and paying for their own lab results because they value this that much. And so the cohort is a way that we facilitate farmer to farmer learning. A lot of the farmers we work with already kind of know each other or work with each other. Each island is different. But the value that we're bringing here is really having on-farm demonstrations. So our cohort really is based on farmers visiting other farmers, looking at their practices, looking at their equipment, really creating the discussion and slowing down around this and using some similar tools, the lab results being a big part of that, so that we can start looking at a lot of this together. And this isn't directly part of the project, but we are putting this on an online platform. Farmers learn in different ways. Some use technology and after hours, kind of those sun is down, now it's time to learn. So we are taking some of our learning from the field and putting that into some online courses. We're working with some other experts locally and nationally. So we're building that up, and I can put that link for those who are interested in the chat later. And then, as part of that demonstrating soil health practices, cost is a big issue. So not just the cost of the practice itself, of the input to install it, to maintain it, not just the cost of any inputs, but also the labor costs. So we're working with farmers to understand what are your labor activities and how much time do each of those activities take you. So, a farmer might be looking at addressing their lab results showing a low organic matter level. They might decide, okay, am I either going to use compost or cover crops to raise, to help me raise my organic matter levels as part of my management strategy. And they've got to look at that, what makes sense for them based on what equipment do they have? Can they spread that compost easy? Do they have a commercial product that they can buy that they feel is going to be worth it? They just pay that bill and it's on their fields and they feel good about it. Or is cover cropping going to make more sense for them? Will that help them reach other management goals, such as, addressing compaction layers? So we're really diving into all of these elements here with this project. Soil health plans is another big part of this project. And the soil health plans really lean a lot on Susan's lab results. So again, I just can't stress enough how much the farmers really value these results. They want to know that what they're investing in is going to be worth it. A lot of them really want to know about nutrient cycling and their carbon to nitrogen ratios, and really understanding how that's working in their system, working backwards from what they might be seeing and observing with their crop health. And so the soil health plans, I'll get into a little bit later, but our aim is to create 12, and we've completed 5 already. And I think, a big part of what we're trying to do is work with farmers in a way that's an iterative process. And so my background, I don't know if I went into this, Jeannette, but I'm a planner by background, and we really focus on process. And so we can't get to a level of detail with the farmers unless we provide really this process by providing them a soil health plan. The real value here is not to produce a finished plan for them, but to be able to find out what do they want. So by working with them to produce a plan and giving them a draft, we're able to have a deeper level conversation about what do you need help with? You have all these different practices, but do you need help with timing these practices on a farm map and being able to rotate these with your cash crops? Do you really need help prioritizing your soil health practices? You might have a couple different ones that you're looking at, but this year you really need to focus on cost, and you need to know where's your biggest bang for your buck, and you really want to tie it in to what your labs are showing, what you're observing in the field. So really, I think as part of these soil health plans, the value that we're adding at this point is farmer feedback. And so I mentioned this is a cooperative agreement with NRCS. They are rolling out a whole program around soil health plans and train and technical service providers so that that this can be offered through their program. But you know, what do farmers value in a soil health plan? Not only tied into Farm Bill funding, but just as a standalone. So what would help them? This slide just basically shows that we're working on Oahu. We've worked with Kauai. We're currently working on Maui, and then we'll be working with Hawaiʻi Island next. And so depending on what island you're on, we have farmers that have provided information from each island. So this is kind of, you know, what I was getting into here is what do farmers value in a soil health plan? And again, it's the lab results. They want to know where they can make the most improvements for their soil type. What are they struggling with, and what is due to their management, and what is just kind of properties of their soil? What have they been handed? So, you know, I really love Susan's work and how she takes that into factor. You know, many farmers are on degraded land that they have inherited, and then prioritizing the practices, and then so really prioritizing comes down to cost and timing. For instance, we had a farmer that we did a plan for, and they were looking at how are they going to manage a new area of their land. The past, they cover cropped, they went big, they did the whole field. Their irrigation bills were so high that they couldn't use this practice again. But then we dug deeper and we found out, okay, they can still cover crop and it still makes sense for them based on their goals and what they're observing with their lab results. But they needed to do it differently. So this time they were going to not cover crop the whole field, just strips. They're going to establish a windbreak first to create a microclimate, and then time their cover cropping when they didn't have to irrigate as much, and also use more drought tolerant species. So this is the level of detail that farmers are wanting in their plans. And then next slide. I can kind of zoom through this, but yeah, are farmers interested in measuring improvements over time? How many farmers want to monitor? How many farmers are currently monitoring? This is where I see we could add a lot of value. Farmers want to learn from what they're doing, and it's hard for them to slow down often. And so this is what this is where I see this project could head to next. We aren't funded to provide farmers with multiple soil samples, but they're excited to have this first sample as a baseline. We're also looking at how can we use simple technology just as make it as easy for farmers as possible. They can just snap a shot in the field, text it over to us, and we can help kind of manage their spreadsheets to help them track their trials, set up their trials. And so we're doing as much work as we can for them and incorporating this in with the soil health practices that we're sharing out. So next slide. And yeah, so what do farmers want to learn from each other on the next slide? Not all farmers want to learn from each other, but we're working with innovators and kind of early adopters, and they're willing to try new practices. So I think it's a fun group of farmers to work with. And as I mentioned before, this just really lets the farmers learn together using some of the same resources. A lot of times this is the first time they've been able to use a soil health test. They're familiar with soil fertility tests, but they're not familiar with soil health tests, and they're getting to do it all using the same tool together. And so it's facilitating a lot of dialogue. That's very helpful, and we're including this in our work. Next slide. Okay, so this is just screenshots from an online resource we're creating. So, you know, I always want to try to share out as much as we can. We're working with a small group of farmers, but I want to share this out with as many farmers as we can. And so we really see that the continuation of this project will be forming a farmer-to-farmer learning network around soil health, and that we're going to do that around sharing practices. And so what we're forming is kind of some courses, but also a searchable database on soil health practices. So you could look up poultry litter biochar. We offer something different than kind of what you'd get at a university. I see what we're able to offer is really kind of more of that narrative that some farmers are looking for. They want to learn from operations that they can identify with. Farmers who have similar challenges and conditions to themselves. And so we're putting that in our features. So we're really trying to describe, the operation type. So, this is a market garden row crop operation working on a Hawaiʻi mollisol series soil. And these are some of their issues. They're trialing, poultry litter biochar at this rate using this method. This is their cost. So we're just trying to kind of give these kind of snapshots into looking at some of these practices. And just to conclude, I just would like to acknowledge, all the good work that is going on. Many of those who are on our presentation panel today, also Hannah Hubbanks, she really was critical to helping us understand all the different indicators that we've looked at here in Hawaii. It's been really great to work with some of the female leaders nationally. And I think the last slide is really just my contact information. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, India. I think if you could also you mentioned you put in the link to this. I think that would be really interesting in the chat. I can imagine this is going to be a very popular course. Are there any quick technical or questions out there for India before we go into the last speaker? Okay, with no further ado, we're going to turn over to the last speaker, and we'll hope for about a 10-minute presentation. We want to make sure to leave time for further discussion on points. So the last we have is Dean, I'm not going to say it right, I would say Odysseus, but you can correct me, Dean Yacail, who he is president and of the East Hawaii chapter of the Hawaii Farmers Union United. He's a self-described storyteller and a farmer himself who began farming on the Greek island of Kos, which is the home of Hippocrates. And he is currently growing 3 varieties of Olena, Kalo, and sweet potatoes on his organically certified farm in Lapahoihoi, where he's also producing a lot of other things as well. So, Dean, over to you. He doesn't have a presentation, so he will be speaking just from his experience on what he would like to tell us about.
Aloha, everyone. Forgive me, my camera has been under attack by these torrential rains. So I'm just going to be with you by word and to talk story for a moment. So my name is Odysseus. I'm the current president of East Hawaii Farmers Union. I first moved to the Big Island in 2000, and I've farmed here on Maui and, as you mentioned, on the island of Hippocrates, Kos, for more than 3 decades. But I've spent the good part of this last decade actively meeting farmers, visiting farms, and trying to understand the challenges, visions, experiences of Big Island farmers, particularly in relation to soil health and regenerative farming practices, and in the pursuit of solutions to food sovereignty. Healihi ka'aina hekawa kakanaka. The land is the chief. Man is the servant. Many of you, especially those who have been involved with Hawaiian agriculture, know the meaning of this foundational Hawaiian wisdom. But as a starting point for addressing the importance of soil health, let's just take a moment to reflect on that. And not only reflect on it, but look a little deeper into it. He'alihi ke'aina, hekawa kakanaka. The aina is chief. In order to comprehend the power of that, we have to be able to look past systems of leadership that most of us have become accustomed to, systems where leaders are associated with power over those they lead, rather than chiefs who are devoted to serving their people. With this understanding, with the understanding that the integral Pono leader serves those that they lead, we can understand the harmony and circular devotion of He'alihi ka'aina, Hekawa kakanaka. Because as the Hawaiians understand, and teach us, if we listen, abundance and harmony are delivered when we serve the Aina, the integral Pono chief that is devoted to us. When our district councilwoman, Heather Kimball, kindly approached me about participating in this webinar, my first reaction was, there are many who know more about the science of soil health than me. She responded she already had the scientists for the panel, which clearly she did. And I really appreciate all three of the presentations before, and I appreciate all the work that you three are doing. But she told me she was looking for a more experiential perspective to add to the mix. So I thought about it. And while I was thinking, I had an unfortunate health emergency and found myself in the local Honokaa Health Center. As it turned out, my nurse was a native resident of Waipio Valley, a mother of three, a wife, and a farmer. Among other crops, her husband and her are focused on ulu and kalo. As is my way, I asked her about her challenges. She told me about irrigation concerns. I asked her if she was near the river. She said yes, but learning to work with the ever-changing river requires time and observation, watching the cycle shifts, learning how breaking into the banks affects the river and the land, and what the consequences are over time. It requires sitting for hours at a time to understand the will and the way of the river. I asked her, do you use any chemicals, pesticides, herbicides? No. Do you use any chemical fertilizers? No, no fertilizers at all. Do you mulch? No, we rotate the patches. After harvesting one, we let it go, let the weeds take over. Me thinking I might know something more. Or maybe instead of the weeds, you might want to try planting sun hemp. Its deep roots will pull up nutrients. It'll provide lots of biomass and green mulch and fend off any nematodes. Her. What I need is more time with my Aina, more time to listen to my Kalo so that they can tell me what they need. So I agreed to participate on this panel here now, knowing that there are just as from the scientific perspective, many from the experiential perspective that know more than me. But that potentially I could be a bridge, an activator to encourage people, to encourage you all to listen to those experiential voices and to the Aina, to encourage everyone to become servants of the Aina and to understand that her health, soil health, is the foundation from which our chief, the Aina, will provide sovereignty, sustainability, resilience, harmony, optimal health, and a balanced climate. The Hawaiian people, prior to the exploitive and extractive practices of first the timber merchants, then the plantation lords, and finally the chemical ag industry, have been one listening to and serving the Aina for more than 1,000 years. Their voices have become one with the Aina. They are in the wind, rushing down from the Mauna and dancing with the Kalo. They're in the chants and the stories of the Kapuna. They're in the whimpers of the brown death that lines the oversprayed roadsides and public school grounds. They're in the voices of young Waipio farmers sitting now, listening to their Kalo, watching the ancient river, learning what the soil needs and what it does not need. Learning how they can aloha the Aina because they understand the Aina is the chief. We are its servants, not its master, not its exploiters, its servants. And if we serve her, she will provide us with everything we need. Well, unlike the plantation lords and timber merchants, perhaps rightly it can be argued that many involved in the chemical ag wave of soil treatment had or have good intentions. But even those with genuinely good intentions are guilty of hubris, of a lack of humbleness before the chief that they should be serving, and are blinded by the assumption that they are in fact the chief and that the land is here to serve them. For it takes a great pride to imagine being able to improve upon the harmony of an intricately woven natural cycle of microbes and mycelium and flora and insects that have been dancing together in interconnectedness for millennia. In fact, one must believe that one stands outside that circle and that that circle exists to serve them in order to justify forcibly penetrating, altering, disrupting that system. If we want to learn about the value and importance of soil health, listen to the Aina. Touch her, taste her, smell her, watch her. Those that we call pests have only become so because they're no longer food for the nene that once roamed and fertilized the soil. Those that we call weeds, they too have their purpose, though we have forgotten it. In our efforts to improve, we have broken the circle. The answer is not to throw more at it, is to return, to serve, to listen. She will show us. She is showing us. And the good news is people are listening and taking action. Listen to those speakers that just presented. In fact, people are realizing, learning, and activating with the speed I haven't witnessed in my lifetime. And by people, I mean especially people involved in agriculture at all levels. We've come full circle from the onset of the global chemical ag movement sparked by the United States in the early 70s, when the prophetic voice of Masaobu Fukuoka warned us in his prophetic One Straw Revolution and Introduction to Natural Farming of the coming onslaught. As too often is the case, it takes crisis to awaken people to the consequences of their actions. No secret, our food production systems are in crisis, health is in crisis, the climate is in crisis, and our soil health, the nexus of it all, is in crisis. Here in Hawaii, after years of serving the plantation industries and the chemical ag industry, we have an unprecedented, since the pre-colonial days, opportunity to lay the foundation for an agriculture system that can provide a sustainable, resilient, economically efficient, sovereign food system for our keiki for generations to come. The foundation of that system is unquestionably prioritizing the health of our soil and water resources, which are inextricably linked. He alihi ka aina, he kaua ka kanaka. Mahalo for having me. Mahalo for listening, everyone. Aloha aina.
Oh, Odysseus, that was beautiful. You were the perfect person to end this section of this list of speakers. Although we could have used you in the beginning as well to set the frame for this. I think this was really makes chicken skin on my arms. I think it's fantastic, this perspective and how it can be interwoven, and your suggestion of how you can bridge this aspect of listening to the Aina and doing and listening to the Aina and yet incorporating some of the other lessons we're learning. So I very much appreciate this. Who would like to ask him a clarifying question? Or we can already move into the questions and answers if anybody has something else they would like to talk more concretely about. You can just come right in.
I'll kick off with a question that I'm really fascinated by, and that is essentially the the carbon sequestration capacity that we have here across the state, and if we have any insight on that, and more importantly, how much more can we sequester with the recommended practices? I know we can't be precise about it, but I'm just curious about whether or not we have some guidance on what that is, given the what we conveyed here today about the climate action potential of good practices.
Would you like to direct that to any one speaker in particular?
Any of our speakers.
Christine and Susan, I think, might be appropriate.
Yeah, I think I can take a broad stab at it. You're right. It's hard to be specific, right? And that's always put us at a disadvantage because we don't have concrete numbers as a direct result of underinvestment in those decision support tools and the mathematical models that would allow us to put numbers on. It's been a major issue that Christian and I both care deeply about and have been really pushing back against for years now. So unfortunately, it's very difficult to put numbers on it, which makes it very difficult to kind of defend Hawaii's position. But broadly, we know our soils to have an extremely high capacity, some of our soils to have an extremely high capacity to store carbon. Those are the andesols, which inherently have an enormous surface area and as a result interact directly with any organic matter inputs, whether it's in liquid form, dissolved organic carbon, or direct inputs from the roots or those microbes that were so eloquently talked about, right? The mycelia, like all of that sorbs onto surfaces and can be stored enormously. So that puts Hawaii like on a per acre basis way high. Plus we're the tropics, where but we also have rain, right? So we have high productivity, high carbon, and these incredible soils that just grab carbon, and even under the most duress, still manage to hold on to that carbon. Okay, so we have extremely high potential areas. On top of that, we also have very degraded systems. And a degraded system means that it has high capacity to come back, right? To bounce back. If we choose practices that shunt a lot of carbon below ground, right? So grow carbon above ground, but also put carbon below ground and then protect that carbon such that it can stay for very long periods of time. In the chat, Richard Ha mentioned biochar and a local startup. Well, I don't know if they're a local startup. They have a local division of a startup that are producing biochar. So to me, this is one of those like carbon sequestration, improved soil health, climate wins, right? Taking any waste stream, invasive species removal, anaerobic digestion, mulch, if we can no longer have mulch because of the beetle infestation, right? Coconut rhinoceros beetle, like converting that into something like biochar that can then sequester, huge potential, right? Okay, and then on top of it, it's anytime we don't have to import something, that is a climate benefit as well, right? So because we have our island boundaries, we can actually more easily compute what that climate benefit will be if we avoid sending cattle to the mainland and shipping it back, if we avoid having to bring meat products in the first place, if we help people facilitate a less meat-derived diet, right? All of these things, waste to nutrient recapture, all of that has climate benefit. We have an enormous capacity for our productive agricultural lands to sequester carbon. What we lack are those concrete numbers. And I'll pass to Christian to add his model.
I thought that was a great overview, Susan. I think the only thing I want to add is emphasizing that point you made about life cycle analysis and making sure that we don't think about carbon sequestration from a 10-acre perspective or a 10,000 acre moku perspective, that we need to think about carbon sequestration from the impact of your activities on planet scale kind of influences on the atmosphere. So if you grow food here, you may not be sequestering as much carbon on that acre of land as you could, say, if you planted trees. But what are the benefits to the atmosphere of not having to import that food from the United States, CONUS, the continental US, from South America, from Asia, and how do we come up with a really robust and realistic picture of the contributions to greenhouse gas management that agriculture provides? The other thing that Susan and I have both worked on and are collaborating on and think a lot about are the sweet spots. For example, agroforestry and opportunities to sequester carbon in wood, to stabilize soils, to return and improve forest health, while also providing food to families, to communities, and then also for economic development. So, yeah, it's a huge question, Noel, and you could write books and reports on this, and we have actually. But yeah.
Thank you. That's a good answer. I have another big question I've been thinking of. Let's say that this bill in front of the legislation right now, let's say it gets funded and approved. And this would include grants and incentives for farmers and producers to support improved soil health. What could that look like? And I'm not sure if any of you have any ideas, but would those include measurement? What components of support could be included to assist producers to improve their health? Any ideas out there from any of you? Would we want more programs like what India is talking about, for example, that could teach these practices? Or, if money was not an issue and if there was a way to get support to farmers, what could that look like in a concrete way?
Can I address that?
Sure.
I think that there's a lot of things that could be addressed, but one of the biggest problems on the Big Island right now for me are the disconnection between all the farmers. There's so many small farms that have really no network of sharing resources, sharing knowledge, sharing. I appreciated the third speaker. I'm sorry, her name Noelle. Was her name?
India.
Oh, India. Sorry, but India talking about bringing farmers together, and she said a lot of farmers already know each other, but in truth, really, a lot of farmers don't. And because of that, there's so many farmers going over the same beaten paths or trying the same from scratch without that shared knowledge. So first of all, that YPO farmer I referred to, she was telling me, I asked her what she needed. She said she needed a poi mill. I asked her how much was a poi mill. She said $3,000. I said, well, can't you get together with the other farmers in your hui there in Waipio and all chip in and share the expense? And she said it's so hard to organize them and to get them all on the same page. So I feel like, I love that Heather Kimball has been talking about setting up an Office of Resilience, Sustainability and Resilience here on the Big Island. And I think like if that comes to fruition, like the baseline is aggregating data. First of all, it's really hard for farmers to have the time to, even if they are computer knowledgeable and have it, it's hard for them to take the time to just input the data, what they're planting, when they're planting, what inputs they're using, what's happening. If we had an office that was aggregating data that had like, say, one person assigned to 20 farms, a team of people that would go out and aggregate data for those farmers. As a baseline, we would have an understanding of knowledge that from that we could then build system with solutions. So aggregating data, coming up with those processing resources that small farms, because I don't know the percentage, but the majority, high majority on this island of farms are small farms. And most of those farms don't have the access to processing equipment, whether it be powdering their turmeric or their olena, or doing aftermarket. I appreciate in Hilo that the Hilo Food Hub does set up a community certified kitchen there to offer services like that for farmers. But we need more of that. We need shared resources. We need shared aggregation of data. And by them doing that, then we can create a system where we can start to really attack that 95% imported food that we're having, which is just out of control. We can set up a system that can show farmers the most optimal crops to be growing at their elevation with their soil for not only the island's needs and the community's needs, but so that they can make a sustainable, good living on their crop, so that we aren't competing unnecessarily against each other, but understanding the most productive use of their land. So yes, money could definitely be used in very efficient ways to really move forward. And all of those ways, I think, come to cooperative effort and cooperative understanding on levels, many levels.
I must agree wholeheartedly. India, do you want to comment on that as well?
Sure, I can be quick. I have two suggestions building on what you just mentioned. So one is, I had, I was very fortunate to learn a lot from Waipio Valley, Terra Farmers Association, their community circle. And a big thing that came out is there was a lot of farmers coming together around challenges and around kind of things that were heavy and hard to deal with, but we need to celebrate successes. And so I think, a lot of the projects that, the project between Susan and Christian and a lot of these kind of success projects. I think getting the successes out there where there is a lot of farmer equipment sharing. I know just up the road from me, ADC, they have tenant farmers who are doing a lot with equipment sharing, and there's these different models around. I think if we could just start sharing those success stories and what they look like, and then ways for others to plug in. Secondly is monitoring once again. So I think the lab results are critical. I also think farmers are just so busy. If we could help them by providing a service to help them when they want to trial a new practice, set it up easily with them and help them really take that off from them, the trial aspect, setting it up, making it really easy for them to give us the results, if it's just photos, if it's just their existing yield data, but doing that for them. I know who's going to do that, but that could let them know that what they're trying is working, and or this is what they need to adapt, and then that could go in a larger database. So then building on what we were just hearing from Odysseus. So
thank you. We have also a comment from Miles. Miles, would you like to speak to what you just put in the chat?
Hello. Thank you all for your presentations and great knowledge sharing. I appreciate this very much. I'm pretty fresh on the scene of agriculture in Hawaii, although I was born and raised here. But I'm coming from the gardener perspective of trying to develop local produce and sort of reduce the need for imported produce. So I've been finding difficulty in that connectivity portion, where there is not enough support for farmers, but at the same time, it's a lot of support for farmers versus gardeners. So someone like me who is interested in helping the local productivity scene. So I'm working towards that. I had a micro grant through Vibrant Hawaii. It was called Flown Fellowship, basically trying to convert lawns into gardens. So I'm very fresh on trying to get that started, but it is the idea that was just spoken towards of making more connections so there's more support, and we have the equipment we need. It's just our neighbor has it, and then we have a thing that our neighbor could use, and it's just getting that like trade-off and knowing who has what and that knowledge shared. So just thank you, and that's all. Sorry.
No, thank you, Miles. And it occurs to me, my neighbors have other equipment. You can almost imagine a neighborhood database or something that would say, I have this equipment, you have that equipment. It's something simple, perhaps, but I think maybe there's never been a strong enough effort for us to build this connectivity. So I would personally also like to see this. We've got. Let's see who. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just add to that?
Yes,
that the Farmers Union's mission is to build that cooperative effort too.
Perfect.
So I would encourage you to reach out to Hawaii's Farmers Union. And I don't just mean that as a plug for the union, but a true, authentic, genuine, that is the intention of the Farmers Union. So please reach out to your local chapter. We're all over the state, and we're building those networks. And we'd love to build that in collaboration with the government and especially the county government. Yeah.
And would you welcome gardeners like Miles as well into that?
Absolutely. The Farmers Union is not only farmers, it's anyone who wants to support farm. And, I don't even know where that line is drawn between gardeners and farmers anymore. You can be so productive on a small lot. A quarter acre of a land can produce an enormous amount of abundance. So we're all farmers. As soon as you put that your hands into the aina, and as soon as you touch that and create that relationship, you're a farmer. So Farmers Union welcomes everyone who supports from every angle and any perspective.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah, thank you.
Tam, you have a couple questions in the last couple minutes?
Yeah, it is a related question. Following on Odysseus's talk and the kind of the more big picture level, where does regeneration fit within the more traditional values of sustainability and resilience? And then kind of the follow-up is, can Hawaii learn from the Amazonians' terra preta, dark earth, high biochar soil history?
Who do you direct those to?
Any of the panel.
Well, I've been speaking a lot, but I'll take the first one because I really am passionate about regenerative agriculture. I couldn't touch the second one. But the first one, regenerative. Regenerative is so interesting because it's come into our lexicon now just over the last 2 or 3 years, and it's gone mainstream fast. Big Ag talking about it, USDA Farm Bill, regenerative ag in the wording. And the interesting thing about it is there really is no like strict, like firm definition of what that means. To me, what it means is it's next level from sustainability. When you have a system that is depleted, that is already been under attack, that soils that have toxins that are saturated with toxins, water supplies that are being attacked with toxins through the soil, that system needs to be regenerated before you can have before it can be sustainable. You don't want to sustain an unhealthy system. So regenerative is farming practices that are remediating the soil, are healing the soil, replenishing the soil, building it back up, and leaving the soil better ultimately than before you planted. For example, like an organic practice, you might be like planting the same monocropping again and again and again, even though you're not adding any toxins or poisons. It might not be a system that is actually replenishing and upgrading the soil. So regenerative is finding ways in a closed system, and that includes like finding ways that you're not even organic. Again, you could be importing inputs. They're organic inputs, but they're coming from the mainland. They're not coming from the land. Finding ways that everything that working with animal husbandry, working together in a truly like regenerative way where everything in that system is not only, it's sustainable is fine once you get it back to its natural, healthy, abundant state. But until it's in that state, it has to be regenerated, the soil. For example, on the Greek islands, when I was there, in the Aegean Sea, they had to put a complete fishing ban on for 2 years on the sea in order to let those fish come back before it could be sustainable. If you just go into a system that is depleted and say, okay, now we're going to do sustainable fishing only, it's not any good. The system has to be regenerated first. It has to be a healthy, thriving, abundant system, and then you can get to sustainability. So regenerative, there's no like across the board laws or rules. It really is unique to every farming situation and every piece of land, and comes back to listening to the Aina, to allowing the Aina to be chief and serving that Aina and understanding your unique piece of land.
Okay, thank you for that, Odysseus. We've come to the end of our time. I'd like to just turn back to the speakers if you have 1 or 2 sentences or things you would like to say to close it up from your side. Susan, do you have anything? Start with you.
I guess I could speak a little bit to the terra preta in a way of wrapping it all up as well. It's actually a perfect opportunity. Terra preta is known for deep, tropical, highly weathered, infertile soils, as tropical soils are naturally, right? But terra preta was an example of the inclusion of biochar, and it got a lot of attention for biochar, black earth, right, within this deep, red, highly weathered, infertile soil. And as a result of the biochar, it was observed to have fertility. What we've actually found through more investigation is that it's not just the biochar, but people were also actively amending with waste streams and cast-offs that was nutrient recapture, right? So it's actually a perfect example, I think, that wraps it all together. Like people understanding the Aina, where they live, what's there, what is needed in order to continue to bring abundance. Even if the land is being used intensively to produce food, to feed people, we can make choices such as the terra preta that continue to preserve that land and maintain fertility. And I think the more we here in Hawaii push our systems towards that circular economy, recapturing waste, reconnecting to Aina, I think we're moving everything in the right direction. So thanks again.
Perfect. Thank you. Christian? Any last parting words?
I bring it back to the producer and coming up with cost-effective ways. I'm super fascinated, India, to learn more about your cohorts and how the cost effectiveness of characterizing soil health for even a small ownership like 10 acres happens, I think, is a big one. And then linking those indicators to the bottom line for the producers, whatever that might be, tons of banana or board feed of high value wood. I think Susan's work is moving us in that direction, and just really as a stewardship farmer of wood, I would have loved that 20 years ago.
Okay, India, you're the last. Do you want to close it up?
I don't have much to add other than, this is the project I'm working on is a very short project. And I'm just really excited to have this started discussion and sharing that we hope to continue and grow. And so, really this farmer to farmer learning, I hope to build a soil health network and just, find another platform to continue this. So really exploring what's the right platform for that.
No. This is the GITV.
Fantastic. Well, once you form that soil network, health network, invite us all in, because I think this has been such a fascinating.
It's all about the people. Yeah.
This has been such a fascinating webinar, and a huge thanks to all of the speakers and the audience for bringing in your points, your perspectives. I think we've covered a wide range of ways to think about soil health. So I hope we've added to the collective knowledge on that. And I really do hope we can continue to create some collective form of sharing amongst ourselves as well as with the farmers, so that we can also listen to the AINA and listen to the farmers in a more productive way ourselves. So thanks to all who attended today's session. It will be available for you to share the link to the recording, and look forward to the next time we can interact. So thanks again.
Mahalo.
Mahalo. Thank you.
Mahalo. Aloha.
Aloha.